welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
Rose here with this week's question. How are abandoned oil wells contributing to climate crisis? Listeners may remember an article I read for episode 83 entitled How Montana is Cleaning Up Oil Wells. Today, I'm excited to have with me Curtis Shuck Jr., the director, I think it's now chairman of the board, right?
It is.
Of the Weldon Foundation. Curtis's brainchild is to tap these abandoned wells that are leaking methane into the atmosphere. They're pretty numerous. And Curtis, why don't you just tell us about your background and how you came to realize you could do this?
Thanks for this opportunity to be chatting with you today. And, this is an exciting project for us, one certainly that hits home for me. Most of my career has been spent in the oil and gas industry in some form or fashion. My first oil and gas job was the summer of 1982 that I spent on the North Slope of Alaska as a roustabout. And I've been involved in some form or fashion ever since. It's really given me an opportunity to have some perspective because during that time I've been actively involved in lots of outdoor sports. I've been an alpine ski racing coach at many levels for over 36 years. And so, there's always a balance between industry and environment. My personal feeling is that we all have to do our parts to pick it up when we leave so there's no trace left behind. And if we can leave it better than we found it, then so much better for the next guy. And so I've had lots of opportunity to kind of see the good, the bad, and the ugly out there. My experience most recently doing some consulting work up in north central Montana, which is located on the east side of the Rocky Mountain front, about an hour and a half east of Glacier National Park and 15 miles south of the Canadian border. As I was out in the field chatting with farmers, I was walking about, and first thing that really overwhelmed me was just the smell of methane gas, the smell of H2S, which is hydrogen sulfide gas, very, very distinct, very noticeable in this particular area. And that's always a sign that there's leaking activity. And so as I was walking about the field and talking to the farmers, I was struck by these open well bores and the garbage, oil field trash, not garbage, oil field stuff that was left behind. And I asked the question, what's up with this? Because obviously that's not cool. The response was, well, these are orphan wells. They're just kind of part of what we have to deal with, because so oftentimes the surface owner is not the same as the mineral rights owner. And therefore, the surface owner typically gets left holding the bag.
So for the listeners, the surface owner is probably the farmer, the landowner.
Correct, yes.
And then he's leasing rights to minerals to the oil people?
Or he may not even own the mineral rights, which is the case in many locations across the U.S. The mineral rights and the surface rights may have run together to start, but through a series of events, the rights get bifurcated or sold off separately. And so as is the case today in much of the West, certainly in much of Montana, the mineral rights and the surface rights aren't necessarily held by the same person. And where the surface owner actually owns the ground, farms the land, does that subject to the rights of the mineral owners, and the mineral owners then typically would lease those mineral rights to an operator, to an oil and gas operator, who then does their thing, right? Drills wells, produces either oil or gas. This particular field in northern Montana was almost 100 years old. In fact, the first well that we plugged was 96 years old. I was just out there yesterday, actually celebrating our 214th day of being carbon free on the Big West Anderson #3, which was our first orphan oil well that we plugged.
Nice.
Yeah, we plugged it on Earth Day, by the way. So
Woo!
how fitting was that? And it's still doing great. I mean, again, it's expected that that's going to go on forever, but we like to mark these little victories and do our happy dance every chance we get. So that's what we were doing yesterday out there. But as I was talking to the surface owners, the farmers, it's like, what in the world is up with this? And they're like, yeah, it's just what we've got. We've got a farm around it. We break stuff, we hit stuff. It takes up land. It's a mess and it stinks. As I drove from Shelby, Montana, back to Bozeman, which is a 4-hour drive. In Montana, a 4-hour drive is just a commute. It seems like. Late night drive, I could not get those images out of my head. And so, as I was driving, I'm thinking about that there's got to be a way that we can make a difference, that we can do something. Now, remember at that time, all I knew is that there was this problem of orphan wells. I didn't really have an idea of kind of the extent of that or understand what the issues really were around that on a national level.
What year was this?
This was just last year.
You were first walking the land with farmers. This was last year.
Yeah. Early last August, actually.
Okay.
But we've been at this just over a year now. So again, indelible on the way home, couldn't get this out of my head. That's actually where the idea of, call it divine intervention, but the name Weldon came to me. As I got back to Bozeman, then, because of course I wasn't texting and driving or Facebooking or research. Never do that, of course not, especially not in Montana, because there's no service. So how can you, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So I got back to Bozeman and started to look into the problem, and lo and behold, started to find that it wasn't just in Toole County, Montana. It wasn't just in Montana. It was across the entire U.S. to the tune of about 3+ million orphan oil wells.
It just gives me goosebumps hearing those numbers.
It's crazy. To me, it was like, my gosh, what's going on with this? There's got to be an opportunity here to do good and to make an impact. And so, again, that's where the Weldon Foundation started. That's where it was formed. In fact, I still have the notes that I wrote that night when I got home, and have framed those now, because that was really kind of the roadmap, if you would, for where we're going today. The next step then was to engage some legal counsel here in Montana to talk about kind of what's the deal legally with these orphan wells. And so got some really good guidance from an attorney who's now actually one of our board members. He set up a meeting for me with the Montana Board of Oil and Gas. I first met with the director, Jim Halverson, of the Montana Board of Oil and Gas, and laid out my vision, what I wanted to do. He had quite the puzzled look on his face, because he really thought that I was coming at it from a different angle, which was to take them to task about this dirty little secret, which as I come to find out, and working across multiple other states, it's every oil and gas commission's dirty little secret, these orphan wells. Mm-hmm. As I explained the process, my vision in this is not to be an adversary, but is really to be a partner in this process, and to develop a collaboration and a public and private partnership. Again, I could just see the deer in the headlights look kind of increasing. And so you want to do what? You want to pay us.
What's in it for you?
Yeah, right. Well, that was always the question, is what's in it for you? And it's like, well, number one, it's doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so somebody's got to do something here, because obviously what you've been doing you're not gaining on the problem, you're actually falling behind. And so it took a little bit in working with the state, developing that relationship. But I would tell you that about 6 months later, in February of 2020, after several presentations to the Board of Oil and Gas, the Board of Oil and Gas voted unanimously to endorse the Weldon project. By endorsing the project, that's more symbolic in nature, but it really helped to set the stage that, look, we're working together to make this happen. So we started going out and qualifying wells. So from there, the next step was to identify the location of the orphan wells, to get actually on the ground, which meant that we had to then enter into access agreements with the surface owners. So we're not out there just trespassing. And as we started this program and we started to talk to the surface owners, the farmers and the ranchers, they were like, absolutely, we've got no recourse. We've had, no real response back from the state. If you can come in and do something for us, we're all behind you. So we started out in the field, and it's been this journey of discovery for us, identifying the orphan wells, understanding the history. Every well's got a well file, and so we go back and we look at the chain of title, the chain of ownership, the activities that have gone on in the well. And then we actually start a process where we're measuring and monitoring the well for a period of time. Once we determine then that this well is a super emitter, one that fits into our program, which essentially just means that it's emitting at an alarming enough rate that we feel that we need to really take action at it. By emitting, what I mean, Rose, is that it actually has a gas signature, a gas footprint of primarily methane gas, but some have high concentrations of just straight CO2 or a mix of CO2 and methane and hydrogen sulfide gas. But methane is really, from a greenhouse gas and a climate impact perspective, methane is really the gas that makes a difference. Methane has
so much more dangerous than the CO2 that we're monitoring, right?
It is. It's like 84 times more gnarly. And it's prevalent. There are days when it's not blowing on the prairie, which aren't that many, where you can actually, with your naked eye, you can see the escapement of the gas from literally these open well bores. When I say open well bore, I mean it's literally like a straw sticking out of a juice box that doesn't have anything on the top of it.
Yeah.
So we monitor these for a period of time. We determine if the well makes sense, if there's enough there that we really need to do something. And then we actually adopt the well. We follow the state's formal process whereby we actually bond the well. So we pay money to the state of Montana to take on the responsibility of plugging and abandonment of that well. So not only do we pay them the bond up front as an operator, but then we also then immediately assume the responsibility to plug and abandon that well. Our due diligence is super critical on the front end. That liability can be anywhere from $30,000 plus. One thing about doing subsurface work is you don't really have a great idea of what's going on down there. So there are some unforeseen adventures that you can embark upon. We've been down that road. As we started to adopt these wells, that's when it got real for us. And that helped to really solidify that relationship with the state, because now we're actually doing something about it. So as we started down the road of adopting more wells and testing more wells, and there's this cycle that we have of identifying the orphans, qualifying the orphans, adopting the orphans, and coming up with a plan to plug and abandon them.
How long approximately is that process? It sounds pretty cumbersome.
It literally can take up to about a year. We try to study the well for as long as we can to gather as much data as possible on the gas emissions so that we have a good understanding of really what the gas footprint is. And here's why it's so important, Rose. When we are talking with our stakeholders, we can then explain what the emissions are that we're eliminating, how much of an impact we're actually stopping. What I love so much about this particular project is that those climate benefits are immediate. Once we cap the well, the emissions stop, go away forever. They're done. We literally take the straw out of the juice box and seal it up on top. And so that gas stays subsurface where it belongs. As we were qualifying wells, measuring wells, during that time period, we've actually entered into a partnership with the American Carbon Registry. The American Carbon Registry, or ACR, is part of the Weldon Foundation, the Rockefeller family. What we've done is we've said, look, these wells are emitting so much methane gas that we believe that we should be able to get credit for the good work that we're doing on behalf of the environment and monetize those offsets that we're creating to help us plug more wells into the future. Right now, our income stream has really been car washes and bake sales, right?
Yeah. Yeah. People donating whatever they can or
Absolutely.
whatever. Yeah. How do you find
Yeah.
the money to do this?
$5 to, you name it. We've been super blessed and have received any denomination of level of donation, and it's so appreciated because it all goes 100% to the well plugging program. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to scale up because this problem is so huge. And so started working with the American Carbon Registry to come up with a carbon finance program that'll help to underwrite the well plugging process, not just here in Montana, but what we're working towards with the development of this carbon methodology now is that this is an opportunity that will exist across the US, because as soon as our carbon methodology and project program is approved, it enters into the public domain and others can join us in this fight. The Weldon Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit educational organization. Our mission, as much as it is to go out and plug wells and do great things on behalf of the climate and the environment, but it's also to tell others, and it's also to kind of be an all things orphan well, and to hopefully inspire others to take action and really to be thought leader, if you would, in this particular space. Knew on that drive from Shelby back to Bozeman that I'd be talking to you today, and that we'd be talking about our role and responsibility in this program going forward. Heck, I thought I was just driving home.
Yeah. It's amazing how things hit you. I've mentioned this a couple of times on the podcast, but you talked about divine intervention. I know people think of that as being a little bit out there, but how we started was I was watching David Attenborough's film, and I literally heard a voice like in my head or in the room, and it said, text Christine and ask her if she'll do a podcast. And I was like, but I don't know what a podcast is. It was like, that's not a reason to not do it. Yep. Taking imperfect action. We all, as stewards of the earth, have a responsibility.
Absolutely.
And it sets you on this journey, right? That you learn as you go along, and you meet incredible people, and it's not a straight line. You're all over the place. Here we are.
Well, what's been so exciting is, and I'm sure that your listeners can totally relate to this, that whether you're, an entrepreneur or, wherever you're at in your career or in your business life, is that, we all sort of question our actions from time to time. Am I going on the right path? I need some validation, or I need a sign that things are happening. And about every time that I get frustrated or overwhelmed or feel like this is the craziest thing I've done lately, another door opens up, and
they're with you. Yeah.
And the path just continues to be made clear. And I really feel that for all of us, that if we're able to have a little bit of faith and believe in ourselves and believe in, kind of those around us, and feel confident in the mission, and we take that step, that I think we're going to find that those doors will continue to open up. And so, that's how we fell into this thing with the American Carbon Registry. As it turns out, they had been, very aware of this orphan well problem across the U.S. They had been looking at trying to figure out a way to make it work, but they had never been able to come up with a commercial solution. Yeah, so we actually fit very well. And
they were just waiting for you to make that drive.
Yeah, it just was another one of these doors that opened up just at the right time. And so we felt it was really important then that, as we're measuring these wells, that we needed to plug our first well. By that, this has all been kind of out of my pocket at this point in time. So we dug deep and we came up with $30,000 to plug our first well. And what was super important about that, Rose, was that way, that number one changed us forever in the space, right? Because now we're not just talking about it, we're actually doing it. And so, again, imperfect, didn't really know what we were doing. Luckily, we had some really great service providers here, local folks who we partnered with, are continuing to use as we're moving forward. And we started and plugged our first well. And you know what? The first day on the job, the gas signature changed. And the second day on the job, the gas signature was completely gone.
Wow.
This is all part of our process. So we're committed, for every well that we close, we're committed to a post-closure monitoring period of 10 years. Completely voluntary on our part. As far as the state was concerned, as soon as we plugged the well, abandoned the well, cut it off, remediated the surface, we had the surface owner sign off, the state relieved us of our responsibility. But again, we believe that our responsibility goes further than that, which is to make sure that the job that we do is going to stay done. We've actually, again, as I mentioned yesterday, we celebrated our 214th day. So we're out there, every month on these wells that we plug, monitoring them, taking air samples, taking gas readings. Pretty easy at zero.
How many have you plugged at this point?
So we've just completed our third. We're now working on preparing our 2021 program. This area of Montana is pretty sensitive in nature, certainly in terms of its exposure to weather. And so we want to make sure that when we're out in the field, that we're minimizing our footprint, that we're not creating more work for ourselves or more damage to the environment in terms of tearing up the landscape, whether it's in a farm field or many of the areas that we work on is literally virgin prairie or grasslands. Grassland rehabilitation is much different than a cultivated acreage, because cultivated acreage we can come in and level off and be good. When we're out in the grassland, it's a whole different ballgame. That ecosystem is way more fragile, takes a whole lot longer to restore it. So we're very thoughtful about how we approach our work in those areas. But then also freezing temperatures or muddy road conditions or muddy site conditions. So we're very thoughtful about that. So what we're doing now is we're continuing to qualify more wells. We're actually preparing for what we call our Plug 21 program. And we've got a 30 well program that we're going to be initiating beginning in April of next year.
Is that 30 wells within 2021?
Yes, 30 wells plus in 2021. We had hoped to do 20 this year, but with COVID and figuring it out, we were lucky to get 3 done, and we have. As it turns out, those 3 wells have produced, in terms of carbon offsets, the value of those is over 165,000 metric tons of CO2 sequestration. And that's pretty darn significant when you think about what we as an individual produce. Our footprint in the US is average about 20 metric tons each individual. Average car emits about 4.5 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. So 165,000 of these offsets is pretty significant. So what we're excited about right now is that we're actually working with a company out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. The name of the company is Radical. What we've done through this process is we've needed to align with some partners that will help us take this game to the next level. So Radical is joining us and working with us on the carbon finance piece, helping us to put the projects together, helping to market these carbon offsets into the various and sundry marketplaces. It's been a really good fit in terms of that relationship. It allows us then to focus on what we do, which is identifying and qualifying orphan wells. We're also working in several other states. So we've got a 95 well project in Kansas, wells in Colorado and Wyoming and Texas that we're focusing on right now with some other partners there. We're working in California and Pennsylvania and New York. We've actually formed entities in 11 other states. Again, while Montana is critical because this is our pilot project, and it's really helping us to cut our teeth and understand how we put the relationships together, it's also then a great opportunity for us to have that reference, and that relationship with the Board of Oil and Gas runs deep, and it's really paid dividends with other regulators to be able to reach out to the state and find out what this well done thing is all about. And so our focus is then how do we really make a dent in this problem across the US? And we know it's not just going to be the Weldon Foundation. We're inspiring others, to join us in this fight. And again, we want to be sure that we're a resource, that we can help with the data collection, or we can help with the processes for the company to do the data collection. Or
You guys are first man on board, paving the road. You're out there with your scythe and knocking it down, and people can follow behind you.
Absolutely. Yep. So we're breaking trail, if you
Yeah.
would. That's a good place and a bad place to be sometimes. But you know what? We don't always get it right. And we've had some folks that, of course, there's all kinds of fans and naysayers out there. And what we're trying to do is just make an impact one well at a time. And what's lovely about this process is that every well that we cap and plug, impacts are immediate. That's irrefutable. There's no question. There's lots of other carbon projects that are very worthy that are going on all over the world. And those are great because, again, there's no one silver bullet.
It's going to take each and every one of us doing something.
It is. Through this process, Rose, we've actually trademarked our own version of a carbon credit. It's called the Weldon Foundation Climate Benefit Unit. So we're actually trading those. We've sold our first climate benefit units to one of our partners. I think you'll find very soon that people will be able to purchase those individually through the Weldon Foundation, through our website, which is the whole conceptualization around how we package the climate benefit units. And to your point exactly, one of the things that our board is very keen on is the fact that this isn't a license to be a bad actor. So in other words, we all have a footprint of 20 metric tons. We should all be doing anything we can to be better stewards. Things that we just can't avoid, or we can't completely make up for. And that's what the climate benefit unit or the carbon credit is for, the offset is for, is to help to enhance that. They wanted to make sure that we definitely talked about the fact that, again, climate benefit units are great. It's a great way to help encourage additional projects and for us to do more work. But to your point, everyone's got a responsibility to leave this place better than we found it.
Just recently, I was looking at the Biden transition plan for climate, his climate portion of the transition plan, and they're talking about capping wells. Were you aware of that? It struck me as, well, you were saying it's a dirty little secret.
It's been getting a lot more attention recently. And, one of the things that's been interesting in the research that we've done and the interviews that we've done with various and sundry folks in the industry, and especially on the regulatory side, for so many years, the orphan well problem, the sensitivity has really been around the interface to groundwater or drinking water aquifer. So that pollution there, the water pollution side.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only been recently, within the last several years, that this focus on greenhouse gas emissions has really come into play. And that's kind of helped to elevate the game, if you would, to a whole new level. We think that that's awesome that additional monies may be made available. We have a little different approach on this. Right now, we haven't accepted a single dollar of taxpayer money in our program. And we feel that through the carbon finance program, we feel that there's a market-based solution to fixing this problem, or at least part of the problem. It may not work on every well. Again, there's no one silver bullet. I think that it's going to take all of us. My gosh, there's currently 3.2-ish million orphan wells out there.
Is that in the U.S. or is that globally?
That's in the U.S. That doesn't account for what's just across the border in Canada, which is another 100,000 plus.
And then if you think about China and Russia and India.
Globally, it's a huge issue. One of the things that's also kind of the next phase, there's also a whole tranche of wells that are still in the control some way, somehow, of an operator who's maybe not really up to speed.
You're talking about 3.2 million abandoned wells.
Orphaned
wells. And can you define orphaned wells for our listeners?
You bet. Probably the best way to describe an orphan well is that it's a well that no longer has a financially responsible party associated with it. So the company who owned it last went out of business, went bankrupt. Typically, these orphan wells, Rose, are in fields that are kind of at the end of their life cycle. They're referred to typically as a stripper field or a stripper well, which means that they're producing very little, if any, hydrocarbons, marketable oil. Like many of the wells up in this northern Montana field are producing maybe a barrel, 2 barrels a day. So very, very little in the grand scheme of things. And
No one's interested in coming in and adopting it.
it's not like being in the Bakken or in the Permian Basin in Texas or in the Marcellus in the East Coast. There's really not a commercial platform for anyone to take that on. So what happens is these wells languish and they ultimately become wards of the state through no necessary fault of the state. They sort of fall into their lap. So now the state's left holding the bag. So that's where we come in. And if the well fits into our program, we're able to qualify the well, then we'll take and we'll adopt that well. And, we kind of have this own little process that we go through. And, you look at our website on the wells that we've got listed currently, and we've got a whole bunch more that we don't have up there because they're not quite ready to go yet. Our adoption process is an adoption for life. If we don't like the well, we don't get to go back to the state and say, it's not really working out for us here, right? We are certainly thoughtful on the front end and doing our due diligence to make sure that the well will fit into our program.
Incredible work, Curtis. Who would have even thought that methane was such a huge problem? And I think most scientists haven't even included that in their calculations for global warming.
Well, certainly not at this level. And we're doing our monitoring. We're seeing numbers that are alarmingly high. So that really, for us, helps to support the approach of every little bit counts, right? Every well we plug is a huge step in the right direction. Again, we might be little, but we're mighty. We've got great plans. We've got great partners. Just people can make a difference by, participating in our projects or participating in other projects. I mean, it's, whether it's $5 or whether you sign up to volunteer with us and help out on a particular project, it all matters.
So what would volunteering for Well Done look like?
Could mean working with us in our visitor center here in Shelby, which is a gallery. We display some of the images that we take out in the field. We take a lot of pictures. We've got a lot of artifacts and a lot of mementos, interactive displays. We have a chance to talk to people about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So we really do feel that community interface is key. And our 3 pillars of the Weldon Foundation are the environment, the community, and then industry. We've got to be aligned with all 3 of those. We know that we need to work together with our industry partners to find better ways to do this, more effectively, more cost effectively, more performance effectively. Obviously, the communities that we work in are key. Our role, the way that we operate our business, is that we go into a community and we partner with the existing businesses there. We don't bring our own crews and equipment in. We work with those people who are already embedded in the community.
Great way to create goodwill.
And jobs where they're needed most, so that way that value stays in the economy.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We usually close with a bit of good news. Do you have any good news that you see on the climate front?
Absolutely. We're making the difference in this project is creating positive benefits immediately. Whatever we're doing individually, as long as we're all doing something, then we're making a positive step in the right direction. And we're getting a lot of traction. And I think this whole issue is becoming, more in the forefront. And it's something that we can actually do. Sometimes this climate thing is so overwhelming, right? It's like, oh my gosh, what can I even do? Well, take one step and be a part of the Weldon Foundation.
Yeah, so that would be an action step. People individually can donate to the Weldon Foundation on a monthly or weekly or one-time basis.
We've got an awesome program that's up and running now, and every dollar goes 100% into the well plugging and abandonment program. And in the very near future, you'll be able to go on and purchase climate benefit units as well to help offset your own footprint. So.
Perfect. And then our last item we close with is a sanity tip. So when you get overwhelmed and you think, oh my gosh, I can't do one more day of this, what keeps you sane?
kind of like surveying when you take what's called a backsite. And that's when sometimes if the path forward is cloudy and or the terrain is too hilly, you can't see. Sometimes you have to flip the transit around and look back behind you to see where you started and where you come to.
Nice.
And that's what helps to keep me going.
Yeah, nice. That's this week's Friday episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.